The sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of the garage that Saturday morning, casting long shadows across boxes of forgotten treasures and faded memories. I could feel my hands trembling slightly as I watched Samantha, my son's wife of 8 years, laughing that sharp, cold laugh that always made my stomach knot. "You really think anyone cares about this old junk, Clara?" she sneered, carelessly tossing Arthur's custom railroad pocket watch onto a table of items marked for quick sale. Her perfectly manicured nails glinted as she flicked her wrist dismissively. "Honestly, you're too old to matter now. Nobody wants these antiques, just like nobody has time for your stories anymore." I felt a sharp pang in my chest at her words, but I kept my expression neutral, my breathing steady. The neighbors milling about our driveway pretended not to hear, their eyes averted in that peculiar way people have when witnessing something uncomfortable. A few cast sympathetic glances my way, but nobody intervened. Why would they? To them, this was just another awkward family moment at a neighborhood garage sale. What Samantha didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't as helpless as she thought. I had made a call 3 weeks earlier after overhearing her plans to get rid of Arthur's old junk. I had quietly arranged for someone special to arrive at precisely 11 o'clock. I simply smiled and waited, my patient silence more powerful than any retort I could have offered. Arthur and I had built our life in Charlottesville over 52 years of marriage. We'd purchased our Victorian home on Maple Street when it was nothing but peeling paint and creaky floors, long before the neighborhood became fashionable. Arthur restored antique timepieces for a living, clocks, watches, chronometers, and our home gradually filled with the gentle ticking of dozens of meticulously maintained timepieces. "Time is the only true currency we have, Clara," he would say, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he worked, his hands steady despite the delicate movements required. "Each second is precious, each minute unrepeatable." The basement workshop where he spent most days smelled of metal polish, fine oils, and the particular warmth of old wood. I would bring him tea in the afternoons, and he'd show me his latest project, explaining the mechanics, with such passion that I couldn't help but fall in love with the timepieces too. Over the years, I learned to recognize the value of what others might dismiss as merely old. The railroad pocket watch was his masterpiece. Commissioned in 1923 for a railroad executive, it had passed through several hands before Arthur found it in disrepair at an estate sale in 1985. He spent 6 months restoring it, sourcing tiny parts from specialists across the country, his eyes squinting through a jeweler's loupe late into the night. "This isn't just a watch," he told me when it was finished, the gold case gleaming in the lamplight. "It's American history. It's craftsmanship. It's a piece of someone's life." When our son Michael married Samantha, I had hoped she would appreciate the legacy Arthur had built. She seemed charming at first, ambitious, energetic, and attentive to Michael. But beneath her polished exterior lurked a woman consumed by status and appearances. She viewed our modest home and Arthur's collection not as treasures, but as embarrassments. Old things, things that didn't fit into the sleek, modern image she cultivated. After Arthur passed away 3 years ago, her true colors emerged more boldly. She pressured Michael to modernize, to distance himself from his upbringing. When Michael's job transferred him to Chicago 6 months ago, Samantha stayed behind, ostensibly to sell the house and settle affairs. In reality, I suspected she was eager to liquidate what she considered dead weight, including me and Arthur's collection. "You should consider a retirement community," she would suggest, her tone sweet but her eyes cold. "This house is too much for someone your age to maintain." What she meant was, "You're in my way." The morning of the garage sale, I had awakened before dawn, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what was coming. I made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen where Arthur and I had shared thousands of meals. The familiar tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway, one of the few timepieces Samantha hadn't yet managed to sell, offered its steady comfort. I dressed carefully. A pale blue blouse Arthur had always loved, comfortable slacks, my wedding ring, and the small watch pendant Arthur had given me on our 40th anniversary. I wasn't dressing to impress. I was armoring myself with memories. By 8 o'clock, Samantha had arrived with her friends to set up the sale, barely acknowledging my presence. They arranged furniture on the driveway, placed boxes of kitchenware on folding tables, and hung clothes on portable racks. Samantha had priced everything absurdly low. She wanted quick sales, not fair value. Around 10, I noticed her removing items from Arthur's study, books, his desk lamp, and finally the custom railroad pocket watch. She had found it in the false bottom of his desk drawer, where I had hidden it after his funeral. "What's this old thing doing hidden away?" she asked with false brightness, holding it up to the light. "That was Arthur's special project," I said quietly. "It's quite valuable, actually." She snorted delicately. "Sure it is. Everything in this house is valuable according to, you. Perhaps we should have it appraised before selling it," I suggested. "We don't need to waste money on an appraisal for an old watch, Clara," she replied dismissively. "I know a vintage dealer. He says these old railroad watches go for maybe $100 to collectors, if we're lucky." I knew she was lying. There was no dealer. But I simply nodded and watched as she placed the watch on a table with a hastily written $75 tag. My heart ached seeing Arthur's pride and joy treated with such disrespect, but I reminded myself to be patient. The clock was ticking toward 11. Neighbors and strangers wandered through our yard, picking through the remains of our life together. Mrs. Patterson from next door purchased Arthur's gardening tools with tears in her eyes, promising to take good care of them. Young couples examined furniture with the excited eyes of those just starting out. An elderly man spent 30 minutes looking through Arthur's collection of history books, eventually buying the entire box. Through it all, Samantha flitted about, encouraging sales, accepting cash and electronic payments, her voice growing increasingly animated as the money accumulated. Chucky Fiao remained on the porch, observing silently, checking my watch periodically. At precisely 10:55, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Samantha didn't notice, busy as she was negotiating the sale of our dining room set. But I straightened my shoulders and took a deep breath. The moment of truth was approaching. And with it, a reckoning Samantha never saw coming. The man who stepped out of the black car didn't look particularly remarkable. Mid-50s, neatly trimmed beard, tweed jacket despite the summer heat. But I recognized in his careful movements and observant eyes the same attentiveness Arthur had possessed. This was a man who noticed details, who understood value beyond price tags. "Mrs. Whitman?" He approached the porch where I sat, extending his hand. "I'm James Harrington from Fielding and Sons Appraisers. Thank you for reaching out to us." "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harrington," I replied, shaking his hand. "I appreciate your punctuality." A small crowd had gathered near the table where the pocket watch sat. A young man with tattoos snaking up his arms was examining it curiously, while Samantha hovered nearby. "Only $75, she was saying, her sales pitch perfected. "It's an antique, but honestly, it probably doesn't even work anymore. But it would look great in a collection or as a decorative piece." Mr. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly as he overheard her. I led him toward the table, our approach causing several neighbors to step aside curiously. "Samantha," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "This is Mr. Harrington. He's a professional appraiser who specializes in antique timepieces." Her expression shifted from surprise to irritation, then quickly rearranged itself into a polite smile. "Oh, I didn't realize we were expecting an appraiser today." "I called him several weeks ago," I explained calmly. "When you mentioned selling Arthur's collection, I thought it would be wise to have some items professionally evaluated." The tattooed young man still held the watch, looking uncertain. Mr. Harrington smiled at him. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. The young man passed the watch over, and the small crowd, sensing something interesting was unfolding, grew larger. Mrs. Patterson sidled up beside me, her eyes curious. Mr. Harrington removed a loop from his jacket pocket and examined the watch with practiced precision, turning it over, opening the case, studying the face, the mechanism, the engravings. His expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see a hint of appreciation in his eyes. "This is quite remarkable," he said finally, looking up from his examination. The growing crowd leaned in slightly. "This is a custom Illinois Bun Special Railroad Grade pocket watch, commissioned in 1923 for a Baltimore and Ohio Railroad executive. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, and the restoration work is museum quality." Samantha's smile had frozen on her face. "That's interesting. But as I was telling this gentleman, we're asking $75. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitman, I should inform you that this timepiece is significantly underpriced. A watch of this provenance, in this condition, with documentation of its restoration. What would be a fair price?" I asked quietly. He looked directly at me, then at the watch again. "At auction, with the right buyers present, a piece like this would likely fetch between $65,000 and $70,000. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Someone whispered, "Did he say 1,000?" The tattooed young man took a step back, as if suddenly afraid to be near something so valuable. Samantha's face had drained of color, her hands visibly trembling as she reached for the watch. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice higher than usual. "It's just an old watch." "No mistake," Mr. Harrington replied. "I've worked with similar pieces throughout my career. The combination of its rarity, historical significance, and the exceptional restoration work makes it extremely valuable to serious collectors." The murmurs grew louder. Neighbors exchanged glances, some looking at Samantha with newfound suspicion, others watching me with something like respect. I didn't know," Samantha stammered, clearly calculating how to recover from this revelation. "I had no idea it was worth that much. Of course, we'll have to reconsider selling it today." I noticed her subtly removing the price tag, her fingers still unsteady. "Actually," came a voice from the edge of the crowd, "I believe I'm still interested in purchasing it." The voice that cut through the murmurs belonged to a tall, distinguished man in his late 60s. His silver hair caught the sunlight as he stepped forward, and something about his confident posture immediately commanded attention. The crowd parted instinctively to let him approach. "Robert?" I whispered, recognizing him instantly despite the 15 years that had passed since we'd last met. Robert Jenkins had been Arthur's closest friend for decades before a disagreement. Something about business ethics that Arthur had never fully explained had driven them apart. They'd both been too stubborn to reconcile, though I knew Arthur had regretted the lost friendship until his final days. "Hello, Clara," he said warmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners just as I remembered. "It's been far too long." Samantha looked between us, confusion momentarily replacing her panic. "You know each other?" "Robert and Arthur were business partners for nearly 30 years, I explained, watching recognition dawn on her face. She had heard the name, of course, though they had never met. Robert had built his restoration business into a national enterprise after parting ways with Arthur. "I've been following the advertisements for this sale," Robert said, his eyes never leaving mine. "When I saw the address, I knew I had to come. I didn't expect to find such a treasure, though." Mr. Harrington still held the watch, and Robert extended his hand. "May I?" The appraiser passed it over, and Robert examined it with obvious reverence, his fingers tracing the engraving on the back. "Arthur's work," he murmured. "I'd recognize it anywhere. He always signed his restorations with that tiny AW near the hinge." He glanced up at me. "This was the Baltimore and Ohio executive piece, wasn't it? The one he spent half a year restoring back in '85? I nodded, touched that he remembered. He considered it his finest work. Robert turned to Samantha, his expression polite but determined. "I'm prepared to pay full market value for this watch. $70,000, as Mr. Harrington suggested." The crowd's murmurs crescendoed. Mrs. Patterson clutched her heart dramatically. The tattooed young man whispered, "Holy shit," before apologizing for his language. Samantha's shock was palpable, her face cycling through expressions, disbelief, calculation, and finally, a forced smile. "Well, this is quite unexpected," she managed. "I'll need to discuss this with my husband, of course. Michael should have a say in selling such a valuable family heirloom." Her emphasis on family wasn't subtle. She was trying to reclaim control, to position herself as the protective daughter-in-law rather than someone who'd nearly sold a fortune for pocket change. "Actually," I said quietly, "there's no need to consult Michael." I reached into my pocket and withdrew a folded document. This watch, along with several other pieces from Arthur's collection, was specifically bequeathed to me in his will. I have full legal right to sell it. Samantha's eyes narrowed. "I've never seen that provision in the will." "It's in the codicil Arthur added 6 months before he passed," I explained. "His attorney provided me with copies of all the documents last year. I'm surprised he didn't send them to you and Michael as well." It was a gentle reminder that Arthur had been more strategic than Samantha gave him credit for. He'd known her nature and had taken steps to protect what mattered most. Robert was watching this exchange with interest, the watch still cradled carefully in his hands. "I'd be honored to purchase this piece, Clara. Arthur was a master craftsman, and having this in my collection would mean a great deal. To me personally." "Why?" Samantha interjected, her composure cracking slightly. "It's just a watch. Why would you pay so much for it?" Robert studied her for a moment before answering. "Because some things have value beyond their material worth, young lady. This watch represents Arthur's skill, his passion, his dedication to preserving history. It's a piece of the man himself." He turned back to me. "If you're willing to sell, I'd like to take you to lunch afterward. We have a lot of catching up to do." The watching neighbors had grown silent, hanging on every word of this unexpected drama. I could see the calculations behind Samantha's eyes, how to salvage her reputation, how to claim some of the money, how to spin this story when she related it to Michael later. I think, I said, carefully, that this would be a fitting resolution. Arthur always regretted your falling out, Robert. He spoke of you often in his later years. Robert's eyes softened. I regretted it too. Pride is a terrible thing sometimes. Samantha cleared her throat. Well, if you're determined to sell, Clara, we should discuss the proceeds. After all, Michael is Arthur's son, and the proceeds, I interrupted gently, will be donated to the Charlottesville Horological Society's scholarship fund. Arthur always wanted to support young craftspeople learning traditional restoration techniques. The expression on Samantha's face was worth photographing. Disbelief mixed with thwarted greed, and the dawning realization that she'd been outmaneuvered. Her hands trembled more visibly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. That seems rather hasty, she began, but Robert cut her off. I think it's a wonderful idea, he said firmly. In fact, I'd like to match the donation. The society can establish the Arthur Whitman Memorial Scholarship with the full amount. I felt tears welling in my eyes. Arthur would have loved that. Mr. Harrington, who had been watching this scene unfold with professional detachment, offered to handle the paperwork. I can document the sale and the donation intention right now, if you'd like. I have the necessary forms in my car. As he walked to his vehicle, the neighbors began to disperse, though many lingered at a slight distance, unwilling to miss the conclusion of this neighborhood drama. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my hand supportively before retreating to her yard. Samantha stood frozen, her carefully constructed persona crumbling as she realized how thoroughly she'd miscalculated. Not only had she nearly sold a valuable heirloom for nothing, but she now had to face the fact that she wouldn't see a penny of its worth, and that her attempts to dismiss me as irrelevant had backfired spectacularly. You planned this, she accused quietly, her voice barely audible. You set me up to look foolish. I met her gaze steadily. No, Samantha. You did that yourself when you decided I was too old to matter. Age doesn't determine value. Character does. Something Arthur understood very well. The flash of anger in her eyes was quickly suppressed as Robert approached us again, still holding the watch carefully. I've been thinking, he said. Clara, would you consider a slightly different arrangement? I'd still like to purchase the watch, but I'd like to loan it to the Charlottesville Museum of American History for their upcoming exhibition on railroad development. Arthur's restoration work deserves to be seen and appreciated by the public. I smiled, genuinely touched by the suggestion. I think that would be perfect. As Mr. Harrington returned with his paperwork, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Arthur's legacy would be preserved, his craftsmanship honored, his values upheld. And Samantha had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating quiet old women with good memories and patient hearts. The morning's events had revealed something important. Time might change our appearances and our circumstances, but it cannot diminish our worth unless we allow it to. Like one of Arthur's beloved timepieces, true value lies beneath the surface, in the intricate workings of character and the craftsmanship of a life well lived. While Mr. Harrington prepared the paperwork for the sale in the shade of the old oak tree, Robert and I sat on the porch swing Arthur had installed 40 years earlier. The familiar creak of its chains transported me back through decades of summer evenings spent there with Arthur, watching fireflies emerge as darkness fell. You haven't changed much, Clara, Robert said, his voice gentle with nostalgia. Still the same quiet strength? I laughed softly. My mirror tells a different story, but thank you for the kind fiction. It's no fiction. Beauty evolves, but character remains. He glanced toward Samantha, who was pretending to organize items on a nearby table, while obviously straining to overhear our conversation. Arthur always said you were his moral compass. I see what he meant now. The mention of Arthur between us felt like the closing of a circle, healing an old wound. What happened between you two, Robert? Arthur never fully explained. Robert sighed, running his thumb absently over the watch in his hand. Pride and principle, mostly mine. We disagreed about taking on a corporate client, a company with questionable labor practices. I wanted the contract. Arthur refused to compromise his ethics. His expression turned rueful. I bought him out, expanded the business, made a fortune, and lost the best friend I ever had. Did you ever try to reconcile? I asked. Once, about 10 years ago. I came by the house, but Arthur was out. You were gardening in the backyard. I lost my nerve and left without speaking to you. He shook his head. Another regret to add to the collection. I remembered that day. A strange car idling on the street, then driving away when I'd looked up. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. He kept every article about your success, I told him. Newspaper clippings, magazine features, all in a folder in his desk. He was proud of you, despite everything. Tears shimmered in Robert's eyes. I never deserved his loyalty. Friendship isn't about deserving, I said. It's about accepting. Our conversation paused as Mr. Harrington approached with documents requiring signatures. The sale was straightforward. $70,000 for the watch, with matching donations from both Robert and me to the scholarship fund. $140,000 to help young people learn Arthur's craft. A legacy more meaningful than the watch itself. Samantha hovered nearby as I signed, her composure restored, but her eyes calculating. I could almost hear her composing the version of events she would relate to. Michael. How she'd discovered the watch's true value. How she'd protected family interests. How I'd stubbornly refused her guidance. As Mr. Harrington finalized the paperwork, I noticed something that had escaped my attention earlier. A small, worn photo tucked into the back of the watch case. I carefully removed it and felt my heart constrict. It showed Arthur and Robert, much younger, standing proudly in front of their first shop. Arthur had kept it all these years, hidden within his most prized possession. I handed the photo to Robert. I think this belongs with the watch. His hands trembled slightly as he accepted it. I remember this day. We'd just restored our first major piece, a grandfather clock from the 1850s. We were so proud, so certain we'd conquer the world together. In a way, you did, I said softly. Our moment was interrupted by the electronic chime of Samantha's phone. She checked the screen and her expression changed to one of alarm. Michael's calling, she announced, loud enough for several nearby customers to hear. I should tell him about the watch. Her tone suggested she was looking forward to presenting herself as the vigilant protector of family treasures. By all means, I replied calmly. You should take that call somewhere private. She retreated to the house and I turned back to Robert. Michael is a good man, I said. He has Arthur's kindness, though perhaps not his discernment in all matters. Robert nodded understandingly. Arthur would be proud of him regardless. Yes, I agreed. That was Arthur's gift, seeing the best in people even when they disappointed him. We fell into comfortable silence, watching the garage sale continue around us. Most of the larger items were gone now, leaving scattered books, kitchenware, and clothing. The day was heating up, the Virginia summer asserting itself with growing humidity. Mr. Harrington completed his work and prepared to leave. The funds will be transferred to the Horological Society by Monday, he assured us. It's been a privilege to be part of this remarkable transaction. As he departed, I noticed Samantha emerging from the house, her expression tightly controlled. She approached us with measured steps. Michael would like to speak with you, she said, extending her phone toward me. He's quite concerned about the sale. I accepted the phone, hearing my son's familiar voice tinged with confusion. Mom? What's going on? Samantha says you're selling Dad's things to strangers without consulting us. Hello, Michael, I said, my voice steady despite the undercurrent of tension. It's good to hear your voice. How's Chicago treating you? Mom, please, he replied, the frustration evident in his tone. Samantha says you've sold Dad's pocket watch for some ridiculous amount of money. Is that true? I glanced at Samantha, who was watching me with barely concealed smugness, certain she had regained the upper hand by involving my son. Yes, that's true, I confirmed. Arthur's railroad pocket watch was appraised at $70,000. I've sold it to Robert Jenkins. You remember Dad's old business partner? The full amount is being donated to establish a scholarship in your father's name at the Horological Society. There was a long pause. 70,000? Mom, that's incredible. But why didn't you discuss this with me first? Because the watch was mine to sell, Michael. Your father left specific items to each of us in his will. The pocket watch and several other timepieces were bequeathed directly to me. I didn't know that. Samantha shifted uncomfortably beside me, her confidence visibly wavering. There's something else you should know, I continued, my eyes still on Samantha. Robert is arranging for the watch to be displayed at the Charlottesville Museum of American History. Your father's craftsmanship will be recognized publicly. I think that would have meant more to him than any amount of money. Yeah. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, put Samantha back on the phone, please. I handed the phone to her without comment. She stepped away, speaking in hushed tones that grew increasingly defensive. Her free hand gestured emphatically as her face flushed with emotion. Whatever Michael was saying clearly wasn't the validation she had expected. Robert watched the scene with thoughtful eyes. Family? Dynamics, he murmured. Always complicated. Arthur used to say that families are like his pocket watches, I replied. The mechanisms are intricate, and when something's out of alignment, the whole system suffers. Samantha returned, thrust the phone into her pocket, and busied herself reorganizing a table of items that didn't need reorganizing. Her movements were sharp, agitated. Everything. All right? I asked mildly. She looked up, her composure cracking slightly. Michael is confused. He thinks I should have known about the provisions in Arthur's will, as if I memorized every page. She straightened a stack of old magazines unnecessarily. He wants to speak with you again tonight, privately. I nodded, unsurprised. Michael had always been perceptive, even as a child. Samantha might have influenced his perspective on many things, but he still possessed his father's intuition about people's true natures. The remainder of the garage sale proceeded with a new undercurrent of tension. Samantha maintained her distance from me, speaking only when necessary, her earlier confidence replaced by a brittle formality. By early afternoon, most items had been sold, and the few neighbors still browsing seemed more interested in lingering to observe our family drama than in making purchases. Robert had stayed, helping me box unsold items for donation and sharing memories of Arthur that made me laugh for the first time in months. It felt like reclaiming pieces of my husband that had been buried beneath grief and Samantha's persistent dismissal of his legacy. As the last customers departed, Robert approached me with the watch carefully wrapped in soft cloth. I've been thinking, he said. Before I donate this to the museum, would you like to keep it for a while? To have a proper goodbye? The gesture touched me deeply. That's very thoughtful, but no. Arthur would want it where people could appreciate it, where it could tell its story. I placed my hand briefly over his. But I would like to visit it at the museum, perhaps with you as my guide. His smile was warm. I'd be honored. Samantha, overhearing this exchange, gave a barely audible scoff as she folded a card table. Her phone chimed with a text, and whatever she read caused her expression to darken further. Michael will be flying home tomorrow, she announced, not looking at either of us. He feels we need to have a family meeting about recent events. The emphasis she placed on family made it clear that Robert was excluded from this category. He picked up on her tone immediately. I should be going, he said, gathering his things. Clara, it's been wonderful reconnecting. May I call you sometime this week? Perhaps we could have that lunch we discussed. I'd like that very much, I replied, touched by the prospect of renewing a friendship that had meant so much to Arthur. As Robert departed with the carefully wrapped watch, Samantha abandoned any pretense of politeness. Well, she said, her voice tight with suppressed anger, I hope you're satisfied. You've thoroughly embarrassed me in front of the entire neighborhood, alienated Michael, and given away a small fortune. That could have helped with our future. I regarded her calmly. Is that what you truly believe happened today? What else would you call it? You set me up to look foolish. You deliberately let me undervalue that watch, knowing all along what it was worth. No, Samantha, I tried to tell you it was valuable. You chose not to listen because you decided I was too old to have relevant knowledge. I began gathering my things, suddenly weary of the confrontation. As for alienating Michael, I've simply told him the truth. How he interprets that is between the two of you. He doesn't understand, she insisted. None of you understand what it's like trying to manage everything, the house, the sale, your care, while he's building his career in Chicago. I've been doing my best in an impossible situation. There was a flash of genuine distress in her eyes that gave me pause. Despite her flaws, Samantha was human, with her own fears and insecurities. Perhaps Arthur would have found compassion for her in this moment. I know it hasn't been easy, I conceded. But treating me like an obsolete inconvenience isn't the solution, Samantha. I'm still capable, still valuable, still very much present in this family. She looked away, unable or unwilling to acknowledge the truth in my words. We finished cleaning up in silence, the afternoon heat giving way to the first hints of evening coolness. As we carried the last boxes to her car, Mrs. Patterson approached from next door, a plate of cookies in hand. I thought you might need these after such a long day, she said, handing them to me with a warm smile. Then, turning to Samantha with deliberate politeness, she added, It was quite an educational afternoon. I never realized how much history could be contained in a single timepiece. Samantha forced a tight smile. Yes, quite enlightening for everyone. After Mrs. Patterson returned home, we completed loading Samantha's car in silence. The driveway that had been crowded with merchandise and neighbors hours earlier now seemed vast and empty, like the space that had opened between us. I'll be staying at the Marriott tonight, Samantha announced, her tone suggesting this was a punishment for me rather than her choice. Michael arrives tomorrow at noon. He wants us to meet here at 2 o'clock. I nodded, too tired to argue or question her decision. Drive safely. As her car disappeared down the street, I returned to the quiet house that had been my home for over 5 decades. Without the constant criticism and tension of Samantha's presence, it felt like a sanctuary again. I made myself a simple dinner and ate it on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. Later, as I prepared for bed, I found myself lingering in Arthur's study. Though many of his belongings had been sold, his presence still permeated the room. In the worn leather of his desk chair, the faint scent of pipe tobacco that clung to the curtains, the precision tools still arranged in their drawer. You would have enjoyed today, I told his memory, especially seeing Robert again. I think you guided him here somehow. The house creaked and settled around me. It's so familiar sounds comforting rather than lonely. For the first time since Arthur's passing, I felt fully present in my own home, reclaiming not just physical space, but my rightful place in the family narrative. Whatever tomorrow's meeting might bring, I would face it with the quiet dignity Arthur had always valued, not because I was too old to fight, but because I was wise enough to recognize when victory had already been achieved. Sunday dawned with a clarity that seemed symbolic, bright sunlight streaming through windows I had opened wide to welcome the fresh air. I'd slept better than I had in months, free from Samantha's critical presence and buoyed by the previous day's vindication. I spent the morning preparing for Michael's arrival, not with nervous energy, but with purposeful calm. I baked his favorite lemon squares, Arthur's recipe, and arranged fresh flowers from the garden in the crystal vase that had been a wedding gift from Robert and his late wife Barbara. Small touches of normalcy and history to ground our coming conversation. At 11, the phone rang. It was Robert, calling to check on me. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning, he said, his voice warm through the line. Not at all. I'm just preparing for Michael's visit. How are you feeling about that? I considered the question honestly. Ready. It's time for some truths to be spoken aloud. If you need anything, moral support, legal advice, or just a friendly face, I'm only a phone call away, he offered. The gesture touched me. Thank you. I may take you up on that lunch invitation later this week. There's a story about Arthur I think you'd appreciate. Something that happened after your disagreement. I'd like that very much, he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. We chatted briefly about the museum arrangements for the watch before saying goodbye. As I hung up, I realized how much I'd missed this kind of conversation. Equal, respectful, tinged with genuine affection. Samantha's presence had gradually isolated me, her subtle messaging discouraging visitors and portraying me as fragile and declining. At precisely 2 o'clock, I heard Michael's rental car pull into the driveway. I watched through the living room window as he emerged. My son, now 48, with Arthur's height and my stubbornness, looking tired from travel and concern. Samantha stepped out of her own car, which had arrived moments earlier, and approached him with a performance of affectionate greeting that seemed hollow, even from a distance. I opened the front door before they reached it. Michael, I said warmly, embracing him. It's so good to see you. He returned the hug with genuine feeling. Mom, you look well. Appearances can be deceiving, Samantha murmured, just loudly, enough to be heard. I chose to ignore the comment, leading them into the living room where I'd arranged coffee and the lemon squares. We settled into an awkward triangle. Michael and Samantha on the sofa, me in Arthur's old armchair. I think, Michael began carefully, we need to discuss what happened yesterday, and maybe some larger issues as well. Samantha jumped in immediately. I feel I should explain my perspective first. Clara, I know you think I deliberately undervalued Arthur's watch, but that simply isn't true. I consulted with a local antique dealer who assured me these old railroad watches typically sell for under $100. Which dealer? Michael asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. She hesitated. Jim, at that shop on Market Street, I don't remember. The exact name. Market Street Antiques closed 3 years ago, I noted quietly. Shortly after Arthur's funeral. A flash of panic crossed her face. Then it must have been another shop. The point is, I sought professional advice. Michael's expression remained thoughtful. And the appraiser Mom called? He valued it at $70,000? Yes, I confirmed. Mr. Harrington from Fielding and Sons. He's considered one of the top horological appraisers on the East Coast. And Robert Jenkins purchased it for the full amount? Dad's old partner? I nodded. The entire sum is being donated to establish a scholarship in your father's name. Robert is also arranging for the watch to be displayed at the Charlottesville Museum. Michael absorbed this information, his gaze shifting between Samantha and me. I see. And this was legally your decision to make, Mom? The watch was specifically left to you? Yes. Your father's will included a codicil listing specific items and their intended recipients. You received his collection of first edition history books, his grandfather's pocket knife, and the workshop tools you'd always admired. I received several of his finest timepieces, including the railroad watch. I never saw this codicil, Samantha interjected. It was included with the probate document sent to your home, I replied. The same package contained information about Arthur's life insurance policy and pension distribution. Michael turned to Samantha, his expression unreadable. We received those documents. They're in the filing cabinet in my home office. The silence that followed Michael's statement hung heavy in the room. Samantha's face flushed, her composure visibly cracking. She reached for her coffee cup with unsteady hands, buying time. I must have overlooked that section, she finally managed. There were so many documents, so many details to manage after Arthur passed. Michael's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained questioning. Samantha, we went through those papers together. I specifically remember discussing Dad's bequests. I watched my son carefully. His tone wasn't accusatory but carried a new weight of awareness. In that moment, I saw Arthur in him so clearly. The same careful consideration before judgment, the same willingness to seek understanding rather than immediately assign blame. There's something else you, should know, I said quietly. Yesterday wasn't just about the watch. Samantha's eyes darted toward me, wary and defensive. When Arthur was diagnosed with heart disease, I continued. He made me promise something. He said, Clara, when I'm gone, don't let grief rob you of your voice. Don't become invisible. Michael's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. That sounds like Dad. For a while, I broke that promise, I admitted. I retreated into grief, allowed my space to shrink, accepted being treated as though my age had diminished my value. Mom, I never meant to, Michael began, but I raised my hand gently. I know you didn't, dear. But sometimes silence allows situations to develop that we'd never consciously choose. I looked directly at Samantha. When you told the neighbors I was too old to matter, it wasn't the first time you'd expressed such sentiments, but it was the moment I remembered my promise to Arthur. Samantha stared at the carpet. I was frustrated. You've been resistant to every suggestion I've made about modernizing the house, about your living arrangements, about moving forward. Because they weren't suggestions, I replied evenly. They were directives, and they all pointed toward erasing Arthur's presence and diminishing mine. Michael looked between us, comprehension dawning. Is that why Mrs. Patterson called me last month? She seemed concerned but wouldn't specify why. I nodded. She's witnessed several uncomfortable moments. Michael set his coffee cup down decisively. I think I need to understand exactly what's been happening during my absence. The next hour unfolded like the careful disassembly of one of Arthur's timepieces, revealing the intricate mechanics of what had transpired over the past 6 months. I described Samantha's gradual dismissal of my input, her systematic selling or discarding of Arthur's belongings without consultation, her comments about my age and capabilities to neighbors and family, friends. Michael listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Samantha attempted several defenses, that she'd been overwhelmed, that she'd only wanted what was best for everyone, that I'd misinterpreted her intentions, but each rang hollow against the accumulated evidence. The garage sale, Michael said finally, was supposed to be for items we'd agreed upon. Small appliances we no longer needed, some furniture from the guest room, books we'd already cataloged. He turned to Samantha. How did Dad's watch end up for sale? She shifted uncomfortably. I found it while organizing. I assumed it was just an old keepsake. An old keepsake you priced at $75? I noted quietly. I didn't know its value, she insisted, her voice rising. No, I agreed. You didn't. Because you didn't ask, didn't listen, and didn't care to learn. You decided anything old was worthless, including me. Michael set down his coffee cup with a decisive click. I think I understand the situation now. He took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. Samantha, I need to speak with my mother alone. Would you mind giving us some time? The color drained from her face. Michael, everything I did was with the best intentions. You were focused on your career, the move to Chicago. Someone had to manage things here. Please, he said firmly. I need time with Mom. Reluctantly, Samantha gathered her purse and left, the front door closing behind her with uncharacteristic gentleness, as if she suddenly feared making any more negative impressions. In the silence that followed, Michael moved to sit beside me on the arm of my chair, just as he had done as a boy when seeking comfort or closeness. Mom, I owe you an apology, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I had no idea things had gotten so distorted. I should have been more present, more attentive. I patted his hand. You were building your life as you should, and grief can make us blind to many things. Not just grief, he admitted. Convenience. It was easier to believe everything was being handled well here than to question or investigate. Easier to accept Samantha's updates than to check for myself. We sat together in contemplative silence, the afternoon light shifting through the windows. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice carrying the decisive tone that told me a decision had been reached. I've been offered a permanent position in Chicago, he said. Better salary, more responsibility. Samantha has been pushing me to accept it, to sell this house, to move you into assisted living. I nodded, unsurprised. And what do you want, Michael? He looked around the living room, taking in the details of the home where he'd grown up. I want to honor Dad's legacy. And yours. He squeezed my hand. I'm going to decline the promotion. There are opportunities here in Charlottesville that I can pursue. This house, your home, stays exactly as it is, for as long as you want it. Relief and gratitude washed over me, but also concern. And Samantha? His expression turned somber. That's a conversation we need to have privately. But I think we both know our marriage has been struggling for some time. This situation has simply clarified things. I wanted to protest, to urge caution, but I recognized the resolve in his eyes, Arthur's resolve. Some decisions once reached cannot and should not be undone. Whatever happens, I said, you will always have a home here. He smiled, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. I know, Mom. I've always known that. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, we continued talking about Arthur, about memories, about futures we might build. For the first time since losing my husband, I felt truly seen, not as a problem to be managed or an obligation to be fulfilled, but as a person of value and substance. Like one of Arthur's beloved timepieces, our family was being carefully reset, each component finding its proper place and purpose once more. 3 months after the fateful garage sale, the Charlottesville Museum of American History unveiled its new exhibit, Keeping Time, the art and craft of American watchmaking. At its center, displayed in a custom-built case with perfect lighting, sat Arthur's railroad pocket watch, its gold case gleaming, its intricate mechanisms visible through a specially designed viewing panel. I stood before it on opening night, dressed in a new blue dress that Michael had insisted on buying for the occasion. Beside me, Robert adjusted his bow tie nervously. Do you think Arthur would approve? He asked quietly. He'd be embarrassed by the attention. I replied with a smile, but secretly thrilled. The exhibit placard detailed the watch's history, its restoration by master horologist Arthur Whitman, and its significance in American railroad history. It also acknowledged the donation by Robert Jenkins in memory of his friend and mentor, with matching funds from the Whitman family to establish a scholarship for young craftspeople. What the placard didn't mention was the true story behind the watch's journey to the museum, the attempted garage sale, Samantha's dismissal, the public revelation of its worth. Those details remained private, part of our family's recalibration. Michael approached, champagne glasses in hand. The curator says they've never had such attendance for an exhibit opening. Dad would be beside himself. In the 3 months since our confrontation, much had changed. Michael had declined the Chicago promotion and found a position with the University of Virginia's history department, a perfect fit for his expertise and passion. He had moved back into his childhood home temporarily, though he was now looking at small houses nearby. And Samantha had returned to Chicago alone. Their separation was proceeding amicably enough, with divorce papers expected to be finalized by year's end. Michael spoke of her with neither bitterness nor regret, but with the clear-eyed understanding of someone who had recognized a fundamental incompatibility of values. "Have you heard from her recently?" I asked as we sipped champagne before Arthur's watch. Michael nodded. "She's doing well. Taken a corporate position with better hours, joined a yoga studio." He smiled slightly. "She sent me an email about the exhibit, actually. Said she was glad Dad's work was being recognized." I appreciated the gesture, small as it was. Perhaps the experience had prompted some reflection on her part. Time had a way of offering perspective, as Arthur always said. Across the room, I noticed a young woman studying the exhibit with unusual intensity. In her early 20s, perhaps, with the focused concentration I recognized from Arthur's workshop. Robert followed my gaze. "That's Emily Chen, our first scholarship recipient. Remarkable talent. She's been restoring a chronometer from the 1880s as her apprentice project." As if sensing our attention, the young woman approached, her expression alight with enthusiasm. "Mrs. Whitman, I'm Emily Chen. I can't thank you enough for the scholarship opportunity." She gestured toward the watch display. "Your husband's work it's transcendent. The way he balanced historical accuracy with functional restoration." She shook her head in admiration. "I have so many questions about his techniques." Before I could respond, the museum director called for everyone's attention, announcing the official opening of the exhibit. Robert was asked to say a few words, followed by Michael. I listened with pride as they spoke of Arthur's passion, his craftsmanship, his belief that preserving timepieces was about honoring both history and artistry. When they invited me to the podium, I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my forte, but Arthur's voice seemed to whisper in my memory, "Don't let grief rob you of your voice. Don't become invisible." I approached the microphone, looking out at the gathered crowd. Friends, neighbors, historians, craftspeople, all united by appreciation for what Arthur had created and preserved. "Time," I began, "was never just a concept to my husband. It was tangible, precious, something to be honored through craftsmanship and care." I glanced at the watch in its display case. Arthur believed that value wasn't determined by price tags or fashion, but by integrity, purpose, and connection. Each watch he restored contained not just gears and springs, but stories of the people who made it, owned it, cherished it. I felt a steadiness in my voice that surprised me, a clarity of purpose. As we grow older, society often tries to assign us diminishing value, to suggest that our time has passed, that we are relics rather than resources. Arthur rejected that notion utterly. He saw beauty and purpose in what others dismissed as obsolete. I smiled at the young scholarship recipient, and he believed passionately in passing knowledge forward, in ensuring that craftsmanship endured beyond any single lifetime. The room had grown quiet, attentive. In that moment, I felt Arthur's presence beside me, encouraging and proud. The railroad watch you see before you is valuable not merely for its gold case or its precision mechanics, but for the history it carries and the future it helps create through the scholarship in Arthur's name. I nodded toward Emily. When we honor craftsmanship, when we recognize that age brings wisdom rather than obsolescence, when we value substance over appearance, we keep time in the truest sense. As applause filled the room, I returned to Michael and Robert, feeling a sense of completion and new beginning simultaneously. Mrs. Patterson approached with tears in her eyes, followed by several neighbors who had witnessed the garage sale drama. They expressed their admiration, their support, their appreciation for the way Arthur's legacy was being honored. Later, as the formal event transitioned to casual conversation, Robert and I found a quiet corner near Arthur's watch. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "Arthur once told me something I never fully understood until recently. He said, the most valuable possession a person can have isn't something they own, it's something they embody." I smiled, recognizing my husband's philosophy. Integrity, patience, wisdom. Exactly. Robert's eyes crinkled warmly. "You embody everything he valued, Clara. That's why he left his most precious creations in your care. He knew you'd understand their true worth." As evening deepened, Michael drove me home through streets illuminated by autumn moonlight. The house welcomed us with familiar creaks and shadows, no longer a battleground, but once again a sanctuary. In Arthur's study, now serving as Michael's temporary bedroom, the grandfather clock chimed 10 with resonant precision. I paused to wind it, a ritual Arthur had performed faithfully for decades. Need help with that, Mom? Michael asked, loosening his tie. No, thank you. Arthur taught me how to do this properly long ago. I completed the winding with practiced movements. He always said a well-maintained clock is like a well-lived life. It keeps perfect time without drawing attention to itself. Michael smiled, recognizing his father's wisdom. He was right about so many things. Later, as I prepared for bed, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past few months. The garage sale that had begun as Samantha's attempt to erase Arthur's presence and diminish mine had instead triggered a restoration more meaningful than any Arthur had performed on his beloved timepieces. Our family had been rebalanced, relationships recalibrated, values reaffirmed. Standing at my bedroom window, I gazed at the stars scattered across the Virginia night sky. Time continued its steady march, bringing changes, challenges, losses, and unexpected gifts. Arthur had understood this rhythm, had respected it, had built his life's work around honoring it. The watch found its proper home, I whispered to his memory. And so have I. In the quiet house, surrounded by the gentle ticking of the timepieces Arthur had loved, I felt neither old nor irrelevant, but essential, a living link between past and future, a keeper of stories and wisdom, a testament to the truth Arthur had always known, that real value isn't determined by age or appearance, but by purpose, integrity, and love. Some lessons, like some watches, take time to reveal their true worth, but when they do, they become not just possessions to be passed down, but beacons lighting the way forward, reminding us that every life, like every finely crafted timepiece, contains complexity, beauty, and purpose, visible to those who take the time to look beyond the surface.